this. There's nothing easy about it, huh?
Well, so on YouTube instead of Facebook.
I think that's going to be our only, either that or we could do a Zoom webinar, but I've tried that before. Yep, looks like YouTube's going to work. Okay.
Post something up and tell them where to go.
All right, we are live on YouTube, so let's figure this out. I'll send you an email with the link for that. And since we don't do,
Can't do questions then?
if people have a YouTube account, they can still ask questions.
But they could ask questions on the Facebook.
Yeah.
Leave that up.
Yeah, if we post it there, they could ask questions there. I'll send you the link here real quick. That's irritating. Now my internet is horrifyingly slow because we're also have a live stream going. Well, okay, let me see if I can get to our YouTube live over here. Sorry, folks, if you're watching us right now, we're just trying to figure out how all this works.
So who could be watching on YouTube? How do they know how to get there?
If they're a subscriber of the Apex Pro YouTube channel,
okay,
then it'll give them a notification. Let me see. Yep. Okay, we're live. I don't know that we have any viewers. Can't really tell. I don't know how this.
No, put something up on the user group to tell them where to go.
We're live on YouTube. Issues with Facebook stream. Bummer. I don't think we'll get quite as many folks because the Facebook Live actual algorithm is what I need to get software that allows us to be on both at the same time. Okay. Let me welcome folks. Right. I'll go to the users group. Okay, I posted it. Now we'll see if we get anybody that joins us.
Okay, so do I have to do anything or we should be there?
I think you're good. If we can share it to, let's see. If we can share it to the HMS page, that would be helpful. I just shared it on my timeline.
Okay, so I can go to the HMS page here.
Yeah, and I made a post on the Apex Pro Facebook page that that has the link there.
Okay, so
here I can send you I'll send you a Facebook message with a link to the YouTube stream.
Okay, so do I just copy that and put it on mine?
Yep, you can just copy that and post it on the HMS page. Cool. Cody says the link works. Hey, Cody, we are not able to get the Facebook live stream to work for some reason. It worked perfectly earlier. We did the exact same process, and now it's not working. So we'll just, I'm a race car driver, so I'll blame it on somebody else. Sounds like that's Facebook's problem.
Or a politician.
That's right. Either way.
Or media. It's always somebody else's fault.
It's always somebody else's fault. It couldn't have been me. It couldn't have been me. There's no way. Awesome.
Can we tell if there's anybody there?
Well, Cody's there. We have 3 watching at the moment. So welcome. If you're watching us, this is technical difficulty. This is our replacement for our usual Facebook live stream. So thanks for joining us, Joe.
My pleasure. So Cody plus 2 others.
Yeah, Cody and 2 other folks. We had a nice hefty crowd earlier for on Facebook, but it might be a little light. Cody, maybe you can ask us the questions, but we can keep having our conversation that we were having earlier today. We've got 4 watching now, so we're really climbing up there. Zach said
now it's interesting. I'm on the Apex Pro users thing, and I see it live on Facebook.
Oh, really? Let me see.
Yeah, it's on Facebook.
Uh-oh.
It's delayed. It's like what you were talking about. It's delayed, but it's there.
Interesting.
Oh, maybe that's the earlier one.
It's on the users group?
Yeah.
I think that was
that's
one
deceiving
from earlier.
We're both wearing the same clothes.
Yeah, we haven't changed or anything.
Oh, my car's
Cool,
on the opposite side on the screen too. That's interesting.
Yeah, Cody says, Joe, that's the first one. Zach sent me a Facebook message and said, blame it on Joe's age.
Oh,
I don't know if that's fair, but
tell Zach he's fired.
that's sorry, Zach. Got to do what you got to do.
So that's 2 out of 3.
Yeah, exactly. Well, there's 6 now, so we're doing pretty good. Okay. I guess we might as well just start going into our spiel so that when folks do watch, they at least can enjoy something.
Okay.
But yeah, so we talked a little bit about your background earlier when we did our live on the live event on the Facebook users group for Apex Pro. But we were going to talk a little bit more about the 2-inch versus 3-inch lap belts and just continue kind of the motorsports safety question. But maybe you want to kind of recap the conversation we had this morning, a little intro. And
yeah, we can do that. Basically, I'm Joe Marko. I own HMS Motorsport. This is our 25th year, and hopefully we'll survive Corona and make it through the 25th year. That's my car up there. That's a VIR, which I should have been there this weekend, but the track isn't open, so that's not going to happen. And I've been instructing for almost 30 years. And I've been running driver schools of the Boston chapter BMW club, and now I'm working a lot with Tar Heel and other ones. I'll turn off my phone. My wife is calling from Germany. Sorry about that. And so mainly what HMS is for the last 20 years has been primarily safety. We've been the U.S. importer for Schroth racing belts for 20 years. So any Schroth belt that is in the U.S. in the last 20 years has come through HMS. We do the seat belts for about 98% of the NASCAR Cup teams, about 70% of Xfinity and Truck. And we're doing nearly 99% of IndyCar. And all those are custom sewn. So we actually have a production department in our shop in Mooresville, which is a 12,000 square foot facility. We're with CNC sewing machines, and we have custom drawings for every driver, and we sew all that stuff up. And plus we service about 200 dealers across the country with Schroth belts. We were the introducer of Stilo helmets to the US, and unfortunately Stilo got acquired by Simpson, so that kind of went away a couple of years ago, but it's a great helmet, and we were very proud of the work we did and the drivers that we got with those helmets. And with NASCAR in particular, just from the safety side, I mean, I've had a pretty dramatic education in motorsport safety over the last 20 years we've worked with NASCAR. I've been involved in about 60 or more sled tests with NASCAR, all the belt development. So the first cam lock in NASCAR, the first Hahn shoulder belt, the first over-under double shoulder belt, the first 2-inch lap belt, the first dual adjuster on both sides. So there's a lot of new technology that was brought to NASCAR. And now in the last couple of years, we worked with them on the 7 and 9-point belts. So they've added, in addition to the traditional 6-point belt that a lot of you are familiar with, they added a center belt, which is kind of positioned like the old 5-point belt, which they call a negative G. And that's designed for impacts where their car kind of comes up and goes down in the Z direction. So most impacts in NASCAR, most crashes are forward, back, side to side. The Z direction is vertical. So if you're rolling over, then you get into Z direction. And that was spurred by a crash that happened, I think it was in Atlanta, with Carl Edwards and Brad Keselowski. And Brad got shot up and came down on his roof right on the wall. And so that led to a whole review and analysis, as it does with NASCAR with every crash, on what can be done that's better than what we had before. And so that's where they came up with the 7 and 9-point belt, which has really done quite a bit to help the situation. It really that belt works very well in a rollover type situation, whereas the traditional 6-point belt works great in a forward impact. In NASCAR in the Cup Series, we mentioned the 2-inch to 3-inch. I had a long fight with the director of engineering and safety at NASCAR about 2-inch lap belts versus 3-inch lap belts. And he told me at one point in time, Marko, stop talking about 2-inch lap belts. It's never going to happen in NASCAR. But fortunately, John Melvin, who's no longer with us, but is one of the leading safety engineers, he was on the same bandwagon as I, and there was a big help in getting 2-inch belts recognized into NASCAR. And now in NASCAR in the Cup Series, there's not a single driver that wears a 3-inch lap belt. And there's a reason why a 2-inch lap belt is far superior to a 3-inch, and that is, basically your pelvis is shaped like this. This curvature part in your pelvis, this is the iliac crest, so it's kind of like your pelvis is like that. This curvature part's about 2 inches. If you go 3 inches, you're actually riding the belt up over the top of your pelvic bone or the iliac crest. So it has a tendency in an impact to want to slide up. Whereas if you get it down here, I can get that lap belt about 1 to 2 inches tighter, and it's much more comfortable, and it does a much better job of restraining you. So a 2-inch lap belt, is just night and day difference over anything. And safety-wise, the webbing is a different type of a weave, so that the strength of it, there's no difference in test strength of 2-inch webbing versus 3-inch webbing. But the webbing, the way it's manufactured, can have the same rate of strength, the same rate of elongation. It's just a different way that it's woven that allows the properties of that to take care.
What was the reasoning behind the 3-inch lap belt? Was it just that it's more, surface area, for lack of better terms?
I mean, people used to think everything is, the more surface area, it's going to do a better job of stopping. And, but unfortunately on the human body, there are really only 2 parts of the human body that protect you with a belt, and that's your collarbone and your pelvis. And the pelvis, like I said, a 2-inch belt fits within the pelvis, where a 3-inch belt rides over top of it. And the collarbone doesn't really notice the difference between a 2-inch or a 3-inch. Maybe if you're not using a Hans device or something, maybe a 2-inch is a little bit less comfortable, but from a safety factor, the additional load over a 2-inch versus a 3-inch is not going to cause you to break a collarbone or do any damage. It might bruise you a little bit more if you weren't using, a pad or something with it, because it's over a smaller surface area. But there's no advantage. I mean, belts have also changed in the last few years. It used to be when you had a Hans shoulder belt, you'd had a 2-inch upper belt that kind of went down into a 3-inch. But now the regulations and everything have changed. There's no reason to have a 2-inch to a 3-inch. It was kind of a grandfather thing from FIA that's no longer required. So most of the time now, you'll see, a belt, most common belt that we sell now is a 2-inch shoulder and a 2-inch lap with a 6-point substrap. FIA, for example, no longer allows 5-point belts. Okay, so 6-point belts are really the standard. Porsche Club, BMW Club, most of the big clubs that are racing, most professional motorsports, outside of dirt track type stuff, NASCAR, IndyCar require at least a 6-point belt. And the reason for a 6-point belt over a 5-point belt is that the routing of a 6-point belt can kind of, go between your legs and route back under your thighs and kind of hold you back, more on a more solid connection. Whereas a 5-point belt kind of has to follow the plane of your chest and go straight down. So you get much more movement of the lower part of the body. So the substrap in combination with the lap belt is what's maintained to hold you firmly in the seat. And both those belts should be as tight as possible. The adjustment on that crotch belt should be such that no matter how tight I pull on my shoulder belt, that it doesn't allow the lap belt to move out of the proper position. And the proper position for that lap belt should roughly be about the top of the cam lock or the top of the latch and link should be about an inch below your belly button. That's the proper position, riding over your pelvis with the top of the belt riding just below the crest of your, the crest of your pelvis, the top of the iliac crest.
Really makes you think about things differently when you start to hear the line of reasoning that you use, which is derived from lots of testing and lots of thought and different
real world test data from the crash boxes from crashes of NASCAR every weekend.
Yeah,
every
that's
NASCAR
huge.
has a big box, has a nice little box in it that records as soon as there's an impact. It records XYZ data access, and then in addition to that, this last year they've added cameras so that if the crash box is fired, it also fires up a camera inside the car that they can now take video so that they can use that for analysis to see, what's happening in the car under that particular load. And then if they need to, if there's a serious enough crash, they can take the data from the crash data recorder and they can build a model that can run on a crash sled so that they can recreate that same type of impact on the sled to see, okay, well, if we try this or we try that, that's going to, improve that. And that's how we came up with the 7-point belt.
Huh.
Actually took the XYZ data from Keselowski's crash, or NASCAR did, and then they figured out, okay, rather normally in a crash sled, you're putting the guy in the dummy, kind of like the picture that we used to advertise the talk today, and it shoots forward or shoots back depending on what the sled is at 70 G. We've even done some tests up to, or NASCAR's done some tests up to 90 G. But what we did with the Keselowski crash, data, because we're trying to look at the Z-axis, is we actually laid the seat down. So we shot it head first. And then we put a tether we cut a hole in the top of the helmet. And then what we did is we had a tether and we measured how much that the body was rising up and coming closer to where the roof would be. So we were actually, by going to the 7 and 9-point belt, we were actually able to reduce the excursion in the Z direction by 2 inches. Which in a lot of cars, I mean, and certainly in Porsches and in NASCARs, if you're Elliott Sadler or Cody Ware or a lot of taller drivers, you're gonna, they're very, very close to the roof. So anything they can do to keep that driver down so he doesn't contact the roof in a Z vertical, impact is really critical.
Wow. Yeah, that's interesting. I'm sure people that are watching that are thinking, using their stock 3 points or 4-point belts, or maybe have an endurance car with the 6 points, they're going, 7 and 9. That's a lot of different points, and it makes perfect sense. And it's interesting to hear how that you don't think of that Z-axis impact being something that happens, but in NASCAR, that not frequently, but can definitely happen pretty commonly.
I mean, in NASCAR, you can launch a car and it can come down on its roof, but in a normal situation, I mean, a typical rollover accident is minimum. If you have just a slow rollover, you just kind of come in and up, bump, you go over a pillar, that's 10 Gs minimum. You can't have a rollover in less than 10 Gs. If you have a higher speed rollover and it's really moving, it could get up to as far as 35 Gs. So if a car starts, flipping and doing stuff, typically that's in the range of about 35, could be up to a range of 35 Gs. But the 10 G is the one that's important for you to think about, because at 10 Gs, you're not able, you can't control yourself at a G and a half, or certainly at 2 Gs. If you're in your car and you're doing an autocross, you're on the track and you just have a 3-point belt, what are you doing? You're bracing your knees against the door, against the center console to try to hold you in place if you don't have a race seat and belts that are really, or belts at least that are holding you in place. So the fact that to think that with 10 Gs that I can mentally, I'm going to duck down and get out of the way of a roof coming down, or I'm going to prevent my head from getting out of the window with the 3-point belt, there's nothing you can do. Your body's going to go where your body wants to go.
Yeah, you don't have control at that point. That's
control.
enough force that it's just
Right.
You're at the will of physics, and no matter what, like you said, no matter what you can do, it's like putting your hands up on a roller coaster, and you have your hands up in the air. Either they're going to get stuck there, or they're going to come back down, and then at a certain point, you don't really have any control when you're under those sustained G loads. We got a couple of questions here. The first one's Eric Calls, just saying, I bought all my gear at HMS in Massachusetts. Great guys here, extremely helpful. Thanks for everything. Appreciate it, Eric. Thanks to Erica and the HPDRE Facebook page, Facebook group, or great community of folks. And then Cody has a really good question that kind of goes on with our 2-inch and 3-inch lap belt. So thanks for watching, Cody. Appreciate it. Can you talk about shoulder width? So shoulder width, the 2-inch versus 3-inch. There's been a lot of information circulation about 2-inch versus 3-inch. What's better? Can you run a 2-inch shoulder without a frontal head restraint?
Yeah, so basically, FIA says, with the head neck restraint, that you should run a 2-inch, and then you should run a 3-inch if you're not using a head and neck restraint. Although you can't pretty much race FIA without a head and neck restraint, so that's pretty much a non-issue. I did mention earlier, so basically, the load on your collarbone is not going to really recognize the difference between a 2-inch and 3-inch. So if you're not running a head and neck restraint, a 2-inch belt is going to give you the same level of protection that a 3-inch belt is. It's going to give you the same rate of elongation. It's going to have the same strength. If you're running a 2-inch belt with no head and neck restraint, you might be good to run a shoulder pad. It'll just give you a little bit more comfort. And then in the event of an impact, it'll probably be a little bit less bruising on the shoulder, because the load is narrower. Whereas a 3-inch belt, but a 3-inch belt's probably going to rub more against your neck. So, but there's really no advantage. There's no safety advantage of having a 3-inch shoulder belt over a 2-inch shoulder belt. And certainly, depending on what you're doing, like the quick fit belts or the Schroe quick fit belts or the rally belts, they're all 2-inch shoulder belts, and they're 2-inch shoulder belts for not only the reason that you don't really need 3-inch, but also because we're trying to direct these belts generally through the center headrest posts or through the holes in the seat. And running a wider belt through there tends to crimple up the belt more. We want belts always to ride as flat as possible. That's the optimum position, is the belts to ride flat. So
it's like toe straps, right?
Right.
You don't want them turned.
Yeah, you don't want them too twisted and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So 3-inch belt, 2-inch belt, same strength, same rate of elongation, same effect on the collarbone. Comfort could be a slight issue, but if you're just running a 2-inch belt, you can get some shoulder pads, and that usually takes care of any comfort issue with the 2-inch belt. 3-inch belt can sometimes rub on your neck. Again,
I've had that happen before.
A pad on your 3-inch belt will solve that, but there's no safety issue to do that.
That's good info. That it is uncomfortable when you have those 3-inch belts and you're running them really tight, especially if they depending on how they're mounted and how close they are together. When they really kind of intrude on your neck, it can be kind of uncomfortable.
Another thing with 3-inch versus 2-inch, 2-inch belts have smaller adjusters that tend to be significantly easier to adjust. 3-inch adjusters, depending on how old the belts are, what material they're made out of, what kind of adjuster, the physical construction of the adjuster, tend to be much more difficult to control or to tighten and loosen than a 2-inch belt. Plus, the 2-inch belts are lighter, so there's just less mass that's riding, less metal mass that's riding against your body in different parts. So it might tend to have less bruising in the worst scenarios.
Yeah, that's a great point. I mean, I can think of the most frustrating. We've all had that moment when we're getting in a race car. It's really hot. You got your helmet on. You're already sweating like crazy, and then you go to tighten down the belt, and it's a 3-inch lap belt. They're probably older than they should be, and you can't get the belt to tighten because the belt's kind of stuck in that point where it's gotten kind of turned inside the adjuster, and that's inconvenient at the very least. It's also can be pretty unsafe at
Yeah,
the far end.
belts have, if a belt stays in the adjuster for a long time, like months, the belts have memory. The webbing has memory, so the webbing can kind of almost get, not locked in, but it can get in the adjuster so that it makes it very difficult to move it through the adjuster.
Hmm.
So it's good to, if it's your own car, and nobody else is in it, what I tend to do is I'll leave whichever side, left or right lap belt is difficult to adjust. I'll adjust that one to the right position. I'll leave that one alone and then just always loosen and tighten the other one. But
Hmm.
it's a good idea if you have both lap belts with adjusters to move your webbing through those adjusters periodically so it doesn't
Hmm.
just sit there all the time. Otherwise, you have belt memory, and sometimes it can make it very difficult to adjust the belts.
That's a great practical tip. So if you're sitting at home quarantined right now and running out of stuff to do on your race car because you've had all this time and now all your projects are done, go move your belts through the adjusters. We have our endurance car has Schroth 6-point harnesses, and we have a bunch of different size drivers, so we tend to move the belts through the adjusters quite a bit. So they're really good. Got another question here from Seth. Seth
Okay.
says, please explain the pros and cons of a 9-point versus a 6 or 7-point harness.
Okay. So a 9-point harness basically means that you're using a Hans device with over a double shoulder belt. So you have one belt that goes underneath, which is, in our case, is generally a 3-inch belt. The Hans sits in between, and then you have a 2-inch belt over top of that. Now, right now, the over-under belt is only approved under SFI 16.5 and 16.6. It used to be in the FIA spec, but because there are so few people that under FIA rules that were running the over-under belt, they really didn't, it's allowed, but no manufacturers have submitted belts for it. There just wasn't enough demand to go through a very costly FIA test procedure. So they're all only right now currently SFI belts. But so what happens is in a frontal impact, the majority of the load with the over-under belt, so that would be, if you have a 6-point belt, you add the over-under belt, that makes it an 8-point belt. So on a frontal impact, the majority of the load would be taken by the Hans shoulder belt on the top. Okay, but in a rollover incident, the majority of the load is going to be taken by the 3-inch body belt, which is going to be helping to keep you down in the car. And the 7th point, which would, if it's a 6-point belt, you add the additional crotch belt, taking the routing of a traditional 5-point belt. What that's doing is it's maintaining that position, absolute position of the lap belt. So, and in addition to the way that the substraps are, so the 6 points in a 7 or a 9-point belt, the 6-point belts typically go through, wrap around your thighs, and go back almost to the position of where the lap belts are. So they're going back fairly far. And then the 7th point is following the plane of your chest, coming straight down. So basically what it's doing is, regardless of what axis you go, X, Y, Z, in an impact, it's taking and optimizing the load through the belt, the transfer through the belt, so it minimizes the movement of your body, either forward, side to side, or up and down. And so they're so with a 9-point belt, which is, I'd say, of the NASCAR Cup drivers, we probably have 75%, maybe 85% of the Cup drivers are all running 9-point. NASCAR's mandatory 7 or 9, and most of the drivers are running 9-point belts. And what we've done with a 9-point belt is we've actually taken, instead of having the pad on the Hans device, we take the pad off the Hans and we sew a pad to the bottom of the 3-inch belt, which makes it much more comfortable. And then it's also easier to get the Hans in and out of the merge point between the upper and lower belt. So it works out pretty good. Uh,
That's so the 7-point belt is a 6-point with an additional
with a negative G strap added. So it's an
negative G
additional,
strap,
right?
which is basically the same, similar to how a 5-point submarine
Right.
belt
So
would be.
basically, we have a T-bar design that has 3 mounting points on it in one position. So we have a T-bar. So there's the 2 substraps are down. Then there's another slot for a 1-inch webbing, which in NASCAR is typically Kevlar. We can also do 2-inch and kind of fold it over and route it down with an adjuster. And then we also have our hybrid belts or formula belts, which don't have this T-bar, which we can do just a straight 7-point. Now in NASCAR, the 16.6 7-point belt, or the negative G belt it's called, that belt must take a 4,000-pound load for 10 seconds, release another 4,000-pound load for 10 seconds. Because when in the Keselowski crash, we saw a load up to 3,800 pounds on the belts. And so when we ran it on the test, when we ran the sled with that Z-axis load, we saw 3,800 pounds on the negative G belt. And once we did that, we greatly reduced the load on the shoulder belts and on the lap belts, and that belt took it. So you could take that negative G belt and you could hang a cup car with the motor all day, just hang it right from that belt. And it's either a 1-inch Kevlar or it's a 2-inch polyester.
That's incredible, man.
We even had to design different. We had to design a different T-bar, and we had to design a different 1-inch 90-degree bend bracket in order to make that work.
Wow, that's wild, man. A couple other good questions coming in, and we'll jump to Cody real quick. He's asking, can you talk about seats and belt compatibility? We talked about this earlier on our Facebook Live episode that we did this afternoon, but he's talking about sticking with a stock seat versus upgrading to a pure racing seat. What kind of options are there, and what type of seat is required to use a racing harness, and why would you want to upgrade your seat?
Okay. So first of all, if you have a stock seat in your car, which I would assume in 99.9% of the cars does not have a hole for a crotch belt, and that hole for that crotch belt should basically be, following the plane of your chest, and the hole should be right in front of your crotch. If you don't have that hole, then there's no way you should be using either a 5 or 6-point belt with that particular seat, because you can't route the substrap with a direct routing to the mounting point. So what do you do then if you want to do it? Well, you have a few options. You can do a 4-point belt, like a short 4-point anti-submarining belt with an ASM, and we talked about that a little bit, and I think a lot of you have heard about it. We can talk on that later if you want to. And a 4-point belt can be very effective. First of all, a car is, any car made after the 80s is designed to, keep you safe in a rollover. And 99.9% of the rollovers are a rollover that comes over and hits an A-pillar first, or left or right, and the car goes over. Yes, part of the roof might collapse, but the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard requires that the belt must keep you upright and that the seat back must not fail. And so remember, rollover is 10 G's minimum. So you are not going to, under any circumstances, be able to skip out underneath the belt when the roof starts coming down, because you're going to be moving at 10 G's at a minimum, more likely 15, 20, 25 G's if you're going at a high rate of speed. So whether you have a roll bar or you don't have a roll bar, whether you have a fixed back seat or you don't have a fixed back seat, because the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard requires that the seat back will not break, it's equivalent to a fixed back seat. Okay, so there's no difference in that. The majority of injuries in a rollover accident are that with a 3-point belt is that your upper torso twists, and it twists so much to the point where your head, as your body is coming over this way, can get outside the window a little bit, just enough to contact the pavement or arm cone or something that might be out there. With a 4-point belt, you're going to be held into the seat, so your head is not likely to get out the window. But with a short belt with this ASM, which is an extra fold of webbing material, so basically it looks kind of like that. Okay, if you can see that, I've taken a tape measure. So what happens in an impact? I'll turn it this way. In an impact, that stitching comes out, and that webbing gives you an extra 2-inch of webbing, which allows just enough upper torso rotation. And that upper torso rotation is important because that's what helps to prevent you from submarining. In a 4-point belt without ASM, you're going to go forward, you're going to be held equally. On the rebound, your body kind of raises up, you kind of slam the back of the seat, and then you slide down in the seat and you submarine under the lap belt. Because remember, your seat in your passenger car is soft foam, and as you're creating a high load on that, then the lap belt could be lower. Now, a passenger car with a 3-inch belt has a pretensioner, which in the sense is an impact, it actually tightens your lap belt and your shoulder belts by about 2 inches. BMWs have their pretensioner in the lap belt. The big advantage for us with that is if you use a quick fit belt and we're clicking into the receptacle that pretensioner is mounted to in a BMW, even with a Schroe quick fit belt or a Schroe, that belt will be tightened with that pretensioner. The lap belt of the quick fit belt will be tightened that additional 2 inches. So it's going to help to hold you in there.
So it's using the advantage of the factory design. It's not compromising that.
Well, in addition to that, okay, any car after 1996 has a 2-stage airbag system. And that airbag system is stage 1 means that you're not wearing a seatbelt and the airbag is going to come out at a much higher intensity because it's going to try to restrain you. A stage 2 is it recognizes that you have your belt clicked into the female receptacle, which with a quick fit belt it does. So therefore, you don't need that airbag to come out at that maximum load, which in some cases will create an injury depending on how, not a serious one, it's going to help you, but it's also going to give you some burns and stuff like that. And the closer you sit to the steering wheel, the more, that could be the case. But with the quick fit belt, because you're using the factory receptacle for the female thing, it's going to use the stage 2 level release of the airbag, which is also much less likely to break your windshield on top of the airbag going off.
That's a huge benefit. So if you were to not use that, if you were to use a different type of belt system that didn't use the factory female receptacle, you would get the stage 1 airbag impact.
Right.
Wow. Well, if you assuming you still have your airbags and everything in your street car, but that's really good information, and that's a good transition because Brian Tanner is wondering about the quick fit Schroth belts. And Brian has I met Brian at Sebring. He's got a Z28 Camaro. Very cool LS7 car. Yep. I love that car. Minimalist beautiful interior. Car. Yeah, it's a all out track car. And I love that from the factory. And Brian says the Schroth Racing belt specs say the shoulder belt should not fasten greater than 20 degrees below your shoulders. The quick fit fastens to the rear seat buckles greater than 20 degrees below my shoulders. Can you please clarify?
Yeah, well, unfortunately, we don't have a belt for your particular car. And the reason is that, okay, what happens with a Schroth quick fit belt for the approved installations is we actually take the seat from a car, whatever seats are in the car, and we have to verify what seats are being used if there's different seats. And we actually take that seat, we do measurements on the seat as far as what the H point, which is the point from where your hips are to the shoulder point, to make sure that for a 95 percentile person that shoulder point is either at or very close to the top of your shoulder. And then the second thing we do is we measure the geometry coming down to make sure that the rear substrap or the rear seat belts, shoulder belts are not going down at greater than 45 degrees. And the reason we do that is because the next part, if that all geometry works out, then we take the seat and we send it to MGA, which is a FMVSS testing lab in Detroit that all the manufacturers use. And we have a specific test which takes our rally belts, our quick fit belts in that seat, mounted up properly, and it shoots it down a sled, and it measures the load at the top of the seat where the belts compress the top of the seat at that 45-degree angle. And it has to be, we have to verify that the compression is not more than, I forget what 20 centimeters, okay, at the top. So that means at a 30G impact load, okay, that the load cannot compress the top of the seat where the belts are passing through the seat more than that 20 millimeters, which is then going to reduce the likelihood that you're going to create a spinal injury. So that's why we don't have quick fit belts for every car. A, because it's about a $7,000 process to go through and certify a car. And then every year we have to prove that the either the seat is identical and that the female receptacles that we're clicking into are identical. We have to send we have to complete this big complicated matrix. We have to send it back to Schroep for their review and approval, along with the test results from the seat. So we have to acquire a seat, go through the testing process. And so that's why there's not an approved list for approved quick fit solution for every car. And that's also why we can use a 45-degree angle in certain instances, because we've measured the load and we've actually gone through a sled test with that particular seat for that particular car, that particular mounting with that particular female receptacle, to verify that for a 95 percentile person, as far as the dummies that they use in testing, that is not going to create a spinal compression injury. So that's why we have only quick fit belts for very specific cars. We had a few Subarus early on, and then later on we were able to do Subarus, and the reason is because the compression at the top of the seat in the Subaru was greater than what we could use. And it's not that it's a problem with the seat, because the seat doesn't necessarily have a requirement for a load at that particular way. It just happens that most seats, a lot of the Recaro seats in most cars, do have that capability. I believe that we've looked at the Camaro, we've looked at some of the Chrysler products as well, because there are a lot of those cars showing up on the track, and they're great track cars. They're a lot of fun to be in. And I'd love to do it. We just need, when you're looking at a $7,000 or $8,000 investment to do it, plus a seat, then it gets to be, are we going to sell enough of those belts in order to recoup that investment without making the price of the belts, ridiculous? I mean, NASCAR, we have to recertify belts every 2 years. The 7 and 9 point thing is only for NASCAR. It costs about $18,000 in homologation cost every 2 years. So a NASCAR belt could be $900 to $1,200, because we have to recoup that money somewhere. Nobody else is buying that particular belt. So it's kind of a little bit the same issue.
Specialized.
With a quick fit belt. If we can see there's enough market demand for it, then and we do some preliminary testing, then we'll go ahead and certify it.
Yeah, that Schroth Quick Fit product is such an awesome solution for somebody that's looking for that just more stability, but essentially retaining the stock safety and maybe a little added safety from what they're getting from their stock seatbelt. Because you made a great point earlier when we were talking about the 2 and 3 inch lap belts, and there's a reason the stock seatbelts are 2 inches; they're not 3 inches. And I think that's something that we know how much money these manufacturers, we don't know exactly, but we know that they spend a lot of money developing these safety products and passing the tests that they have to pass to get these cars on the road. And although we are driving them at faster speeds, if it's still a relatively stock car, most of the impacts can be mitigated a lot with just the stock equipment. So a lot of what I'm hearing as you talk about this stuff is taking that kind of same philosophy, but to develop safety systems that work really well with cars with the way they were intended. It just takes a massive amount of research and development and time and investment and certifications and testing. And I think, folks, if you're watching, what you're hearing is a company that really cares ultimately more than anything about when you're in an accident, that you walk away from it and you're safe and you're hurt as little as possible. And we're all here because we're also entrepreneurial and love running our businesses and want to make money, of course, but the primary motivation is to care about your safety. So Joe could easily go, we're going to do one for every car, make and model that we see on the track. But what he's really saying is we only want to, because it costs a lot to do it right. And that's true across the board. I think it costs a lot to do things right.
One thing I will say, I want to add, is that whatever seatbelt you're using, there's the proper way to use it and there's an improper way to use it. It goes along with helmets. So I'll give you a good example that's easy to understand. Take a helmet. If you don't have your helmet on, if your helmet doesn't fit you properly, and there's all sorts of videos, Bell has some good ones, we have some good ones to tell you how to fit a helmet, so we won't go into that now, that's another topic. But if your helmet doesn't fit you properly, tight, and if your chin strap is not tightened properly and is sitting back against your neck, in an impact, the likelihood of a severe impact, it's a good chance that you could lose the helmet. And I've been personally at 2 different events with serious injury one fatality and one broken scapula, where when we got to the thing that the helmet was sitting in the passenger footwell.
Wow.
Okay, and that happens because the helmet was ill-fitting and or the chin strap was not tight enough. The same goes for seat belts. You know, the lap belt is the most important, whether it's a 3-point, a 4-point, a 5-point, 6-point, 7-point, 9-point. The lap belt, and if you have crotch belts, the crotch belts are the most important part of that belt. Every part of the belt should be as absolutely as tight as possible. But if you tighten the lap belt and then you start tightening your shoulder belt, if the shoulder belt lifts that lap belt out of position, which is the top of that lap belt 1 inch below your belly button, if it lifts it out of that position even an inch, then the lap belt is not tight enough. So if you want to use a rally belt and you want to be, or a quick fit belt and you want to be safe, the only way it's safe is if you properly tighten the lap belt. And if you're an instructor and you're getting into a student's car, you got to make sure that the length of the shoulder belts, there's an adjustment behind you in that where it comes together. You've got to make sure that you've got the proper length of adjustment so that I can tighten my shoulder belts all the way and I can keep my lap belt as tight as possible. You know, it's no different than going out with a helmet that has a loose chin strap. If you go out with the belts, you know, and you don't tighten the lap belt and you don't tighten your crotch belts in the right position, then the safety equipment that you're counting on is not going to do its job and likely potentially going to create a greater injury. So you have to be responsible in using your safety equipment. You can't say, well, you know, every time I get into a car as an instructor, you know, I can't get the belts adjusted. You know, it's your job as an instructor to go to that car, look at the belts, whether they're quick fit belts or their 3-point belt or whatever, look at the condition of that belt and make sure that you can wear that belt. If it's a race car and you got a 6-point belt in it, you got to make sure you can adjust that lap belt and get it tight. I got into a car up at Mont Tremblant with a student last year, and I could not get the lap belt tight. I was fortunately too thin, which is rarely the case, but I was in that case. So we had to find a fatter instructor because it was impossible for the inboard lap belt to be adjusted because it was behind the seat and the adjuster was not attainable. So it's your responsibility as a user to make sure that that's all
I need
working.
to grab my computer charger real quick. Sorry, keep going, Joe.
Okay. So I really, you know, I've seen a lot on the HPDE, you know, forum. I've seen a lot of stuff on stroke belts and rollovers and roll bars. You know, regardless of what seat you have, regardless of what belt you're using, your regular seat or a fixed back seat is not going to increase or decrease your chances of an injury. A bigger increase if you have a stock seat and a roll bar, or if you're really tall and you're sitting up against a roll bar, is your head coming in contact or your helmet coming in contact with the roll bar where you don't have the proper roll bar padding. If you look at your car, anywhere that's within 14 inches of your head, if there's any kind of a metal bar within 14 inches of your head, that's fair game in an impact for you to reach.
Wow.
Okay, so you should be using a 45.2 or an FIA type 2 padding on that particular component to make sure that, you know, you're safe. And, you know, if you are driving a street car on the street with a roll bar, and if you have that kind of padding, it's very similar. So 45.2 padding or an SFI, SFI 45.2 is basically designed after the same loads that your regular motor vehicle have to take. So you have all sorts of hard surfaces in your car, but they have to give to roughly the same level as that 45.2 padding. So if you hit the door frame, it feels pretty hard, but that actually is compressive material, much like you see in a roll bar padding if you're using a proper roll bar padding. So if you've got a roll bar up there, yeah, you know, it's going to hurt, but it's going to hurt if you hit something in your regular car too. But just make sure you have the right padding.
Interesting. That I didn't realize that, but it makes again makes complete sense. And I just posted the link to the HMS page where you can look at roll bar padding if you do need to order some extra, because we all probably have a little bit, but anywhere within 14 inches of your head. That's
Front,
really good.
back, anywhere.
Anywhere. That's awesome. And then one other thing that you mentioned there earlier, Joe, was lap belts 1 inch below your belly button
Right. So
is where they need to sit
the top of the
across.
lap belt or the cam lock or the latch link should be 1 inch below your belly button. And it should be riding directly over the pelvis. There should be nothing preventing the belt from touching and riding within the curvature of your pelvis. Okay. And having a free
Gotcha.
flow back from there down to the mounting points.
Great information. So folks, make sure you check that out next time you're in your car and you're tightening down your belts. It's very easy to cinch down your shoulders too much without before you get too much tension, enough tension on your lap belts and have it, ride up a little too high. We got another couple really good questions. Actually, another one from Brian Tanner. He's wondering if I put a roll bar and race harness in my car, how do I ensure the airbag uses a phase 2 discharge? So again, mostly street car with airbags.
Okay. But you said a seat too, right?
He
So, I mean,
did.
if
He
you're going to
said,
put a harness in it, then you're going to have a seat that's going to accept a harness. So,
yes.
if you have a race seat, then you've got a problem with being able to use a 3-point belt unless you're using something like a Cobra Nagaro, which is designed to be used in conjunction with a 6-point belt or 5-point belt or a 3-point belt because it's got a low side at the hip point. Whereas most race seats that you're going to get have a higher side that you're sitting in to hold you. And then the lap belts for the racing belts have to go through the holes, but it's unfortunately you can't get the 3-point belt through the hole. So now so that presents its own problem. So the first thing is if you want to have a street car with a roll bar with harnesses or with a harness bar and harnesses, then you probably, if you want to go with a 6-point, then you're going to need to change the seat to something like the Nagaro, and Andrew will probably put a link up to something like that. And there are
Yep.
other people that
It's
make
there.
seats like that. If you're going to put a race seat in the car, then you're going to relegate yourself to probably using a racing harness all the time. And then if you're leaving the airbags in the car, then you have to make sure you leave the female receptacle, leave all of the connectors, and then you're going to have to find something to stick into the female receptacle if you want the airbag to come out at a lower level. So it's a little bit tricky to kind of get all that stuff to work. Also, cars nowadays have seat sensors. So if you replace your stock seat with an aftermarket seat in a relatively new car, you're going to have a problem that your airbag light is going to be on pretty much permanently unless you find a resistor. And we've come up with some resistors for, if you know how to do it, you can get a resistor to kind of put in the circuit, but it's a fairly difficult thing to figure out, which in many states is going to give you a problem unless you have a buddy to get the car inspected, because they will not pass a car with an airbag light on. So you got to be careful with a lot of those things. And when you're buying seats and you're looking at it, talk with an intelligent store that can make sure they're pointing out all of the issues that you might need to deal with before you get involved and make the investment, and then find out all of a sudden that you got a whole bunch of other problems that you haven't really dealt with.
That's a really good segue because Zach actually just messaged me and said, "Hey, here are some of the cars that we're looking into doing the quick fit belts for, and then also make sure to share my email address if anyone wants to reach out." So, Brian, if you want to talk to a team member from HMS, Zach can help you consult on these things for your specific application. I would definitely, because there's so many different variables in this decision-making matrix, I would definitely reach out and work with somebody that is an expert at this, like HMS, that can probably get you sorted. Because it sounds like if you're going to go with the Nagaro and you're going to keep your 3-point belt, but also have another harness for track use, then for when you're on the track, you're going to have to find something that that clips into the female seatbelt receptacle, I guess, so that you get a phase 2 airbag deployment.
Right, so like in my Cayman right there, I have Nagaro's circuit seats with a 6-point belt, and I and I wear a head and neck restraint, so I don't have ASM on that belt. So what I do is I have the buckle. I got a Porsche buckle that I clip into the female receptacle when I'm going out on the track wearing the 6-point belt. And then that way it recognizes that that I'm at a lower level. Now, I can't guarantee it with every car, but even though your airbag light is on, that does not necessarily mean that your airbags will not fire. Okay, so I believe that they will still look at the stage 1 and stage 2, and the airbags will still go off, even though your seat sensor might be gone. So just, instructors, when you're getting in cars, I mean, you'll know, just because the airbag light is on doesn't mean that the airbag won't go off, but I also can't guarantee you that it will. So that's just something to be understanding of.
I had a Corvette that had a perpetual airbag light, but it had a racing wheel. It didn't have a front airbag in the wheel, and that car, I believe, did not have a door airbag on the driver's side, but it did have the airbag fault. But I'm pretty confident the passenger side airbag probably would have still deployed in an incident, but I'm not sure on that. Brian, I left Zach's contact info if you want to reach out to him or anyone with HMS. They can help you with really specific questions, because these are things that they deal with on a daily basis. This is what their business is about. Buddy has a good question. Buddy Craig says, "Is it indeed wrong to have the lap belt adjuster live inside the seat side holes?"
No, actually, if it's so you have pull-up adjusters and pull-down adjusters. If you have a pull-up adjuster, it's better to have the lap belt adjuster to be inside the seat, because if you have it outside the seat, especially if you have it just outside the seat, since it's a pull-up adjuster, if that adjuster should ever catch in the opening of the seat, it should ever catch on the top of the seat, that adjuster would release by being pushed up. And if it hits the top of the seat, it could pick up and it could release the belt. So if you have a pull-up adjuster, you either need to get it inside the seat, or it needs to be at least 3 inches below the opening where the belt passes through the seat. A better solution, if you're really tight on problems, is to look at something like the Enduro belt, where you have a dual adjuster that sits on either side directly into the cam lock, which is extremely easy to get tight regardless of who's sitting in the car or how tight the confines of the car are.
That's awesome. I'll post a link to the Enduro, the Schroth Enduro belt, for you to check that out, buddy, because that's a problem that I've had before with. I can't remember exactly what car it was, but I think it was when I was trying to get out of the car. I kind of moved my body up in the seat, just sitting in the paddock, and the adjuster got caught on that upper part of the opening in the seat, and it just loosened, and you could tell that adjuster needed to be moved. If it was cinched down all the way, then it was inside of the hole. But when it was slightly loose, so if I was a bigger driver was in the car that occupied more of the belt, that could be a problem on the track. It wasn't a problem for me dynamically, but those pull up adjustments, which are really convenient, by the way, if you're used to using a pull down to tighten style belt in your race car, definitely investigate the pull up to tighten, depending on the kind of space that you have, because that just changes the whole world when you're talking about just functionality and flexibility to be able to tighten your belts.
And now if you have
easily.
a pull down inline adjuster, meaning not at the cam lock like the Enduro belt, but an inline adjuster, what you might find to do to get it tight is to take the end of the belt, and instead of trying to pull it inside the seat, if there's enough webbing, pass it through the hole and pull it up to the outside of the seat, kind of using leverage on the seatbelt opening in order to kind of get it adjusted. And that can help you sometimes get a pull down adjuster that's in line. So it's meaning that it's not right at the cam lock, it's somewhere below that.
Gotcha. Yeah, that's all really good info, guys. I posted the link to the Enduro belts there. I believe we use the 3x2 Enduro belt in the car that I race in endurance racing, and it's quite lovely. It's really, really awesome. I mean, just the most comfortable. If you're used to I don't want to say a lower quality belt, but I say a less expensive, more entry level style product. If you use one of the Schroth harnesses, or you get to drive someone's car that has them, you'll understand what it's all about, and you won't go back. Firmly believe that. We got another question from from or Sam Nixon just had a comment. He said, Profi, he's got Apex Pro, Profi harnesses, Valero headstock, all sourced from HMS. Great store in Mooresville, North Carolina. Thanks, Sam.
Thanks a lot,
Awesome.
Sam. Yeah.
Yeah, appreciate all this support. You got the whole lineup there. That's fantastic. Well, the Valero is something we can touch on really briefly since Sam brought it up. But I was really impressed with Valero because I was convinced that just wearing changing the underwear that I wear while I race couldn't have a very big impact on anything. It seems like you wear it for fire protection in the event of worst case scenario. But thanks to Patrick and to Joe, I was wearing this Valero at the track, and it was totally different. And guys, if you're not familiar with what Valero is, I'll post a link to the product listing and where all the information stored on HMS's website. But it's temperature regulating FIA rated underwear. It's not Nomex. It's fundamentally a different style of technology. The fabric itself is not what creates the fire resistant barrier. It's actually how they layer the different fabrics. From what I understood, it created some sort of, I think Patrick said, an oxygenated layer in the fabrics was what created the fire resistance in the material.
Yeah, I mean, Portal is a fiber, and Outlast is a NASA developed fiber. So the NASA fiber is a basically almost like a paraffin type thing that it absorbs and it releases energy depending on how your body temperature changes and how much you sweat. And the Portal is a material, a fiber that's woven in, so that the fabric actually feels like a cotton t-shirt, like a very comfortable cotton t-shirt. But what happens is the combination of the Outlast, which was developed by NASA for space shuttle flight and for fighter pilots. What happens is that it will reduce your overall heart rate by roughly 8 or 9 beats per second over a period of a race. Now, if you're in the car for 15 minutes, it's not going to have a big effect. But if you're in the car for a couple hours, like in a Lemons or Champ Car race or a Champ Car race or an endurance race, you're going to have a big effect. The other thing, it's going to reduce your perspiration, your water loss by about 40%. And to give you a real life example, I mean, there's a PDF that you can read on the site about that was done by Race Car Engineering, independent of Valero or anybody else. They just tested it and looked at that. But Corey LaJoie in 2017 in NASCAR spent 4 times going to Infield Care Center in 2017 for fluids after a race. And a lot of times you'll see after a really hot race, a NASCAR driver, they'll get out, they might just like Casey Kane got out of his car and just dropped to the side of the car because it just so much fluid loss. They'll lose 4 pounds of weight from fluid loss. In 2018 and 19, when Corey wore Valero, he had 0 trips to the Infield Care Center for fluids. Joey Logano came on board with this last year and found a similar result. So I mean, it's something that it's losing water weight, also core body temperature. So if you get a race car driver that typically comes off the track, if he goes into the Infield Care Center, you're going to see in an endurance racer that their core body temperature with normal, Nomex underwear is probably somewhere north of 100, maybe 100, 103. With Valero, you'll probably see a decrease of about 2 degrees. Now, why is that important? Well, if you have over 100 degree temperature, how do you feel? Well, you feel pretty crappy, and your focus is less. So both of those points have been proven and experienced from real world drivers here within the NASCAR community, as well as with drivers in Europe and the test race car engineering. So it's a big thing. Plus, I use a top when I'm instructing because it's very comfortable. Even on a 90-degree day, yes, if you just get in the car for a second, it's maybe feels a little longer because I got long sleeves on. But now I'm wearing, instead of a long sleeve t-shirt, I'm wearing something that's going to wick that moisture away from me. I'm wearing something that's fire resistant, and it's also going to help with perspiration and water loss and dehydration. So I find that just for DE schools, at least to wear a Valero top is something that you're improving your safety and you're improving your health.
I can't agree more. It was a really I don't want to call it an out of body experience, but it was pretty close to it because I felt I wore it for an endurance race and I wore it the whole day. So I actually put it on in the morning because I started the race at 8 a.m. So I put it on when I woke up at 6 a.m. And I didn't take it off till I got home at 8 p.m. probably, and did about 3 hours in the car that morning. And what I found was the most just interesting thing. And I knew that it had a temperature regulation component where it would basically it's kind of like a heat exchanger. It's like your radiator. When your body heats up, it releases this reaction through that outlast fiber that cools your body back down. And it felt like I was, I guess my body temperature must have risen. It was a full course yellow early in the morning. And I hadn't been very warm up until that point. I was probably, it was a cool day. It was 50 degrees or so. And then after, sitting without airflow in the car, the first one or two green flag laps after that full course, I felt like I had a water bottle poured down my chest and there was just like cold water kind of dripping down my chest. And I felt like I was like wet almost, but my whole body cooled. And I felt this intense cooling sensation that I didn't think I would feel. And I originally attributed that to thinking I was leaking out of the water bottle I had in my mouth, from the Stilo, helmet that's got the water connection. So I was saying, oh, I'm just leaking water or something like that. And then it happened again about an hour later. So 2 times within my stint, I felt this cooling effect. And when I got out of the car, if I lifted up the Valero off my arm, there was, zero sweat. Like I didn't even feel like I had maybe a little bit right under my armpits, but there weren't even sweat stains on the material. And it was like cold. If I touched the Valero, it was cool. The whole fabric was colder than the outside ambient air temperature to touch. It felt like, at least it was very, very, very interesting. I definitely noticed the impact of it. And I didn't expect to, just because you don't think of underwear being something that's going to make a profound impact. But like Patrick said, it's using your body's natural temperature regulation tendencies and kind of enhancing that. Whereas a cool shirt's kind of, like launching a cannon. It's trying to cool you down almost too much sometimes, and it doesn't necessarily work the way that your body works.
And then what happens is your body tries to compensate for that and tries to build up more heat because it's getting, cooled in a different way. So
yeah.
It is also antimicrobial. So at the end of the day, you don't stink quite as much as you might with some of the other underwear.
that was so I performed a really good test, and I just crumpled it up and threw it in my gear bag that night. And I was going to wear a new shirt the next day, a new Valero shirt the next day. And I pulled out the old one and I smelled it and I go, it smells like it's brand new. It didn't have any smell. So even if you're doing other activities outdoors, if you're cutting the lawn in the summer and it's really hot, or
you're skiing, if you're skiing and doing ATV things, it's a great thing. Brady, one of our guys, Brady's a hiker, and he hiked Mount Washington. Normally when he gets to the top of the mountain, he's all sweaty and stuff. It's freezing up there and it's very uncomfortable. With the Valero, he said it was a really noticeable difference.
Oh, I absolutely believe that. I firmly believe we'll see it starting to be used in other applications because it's just such a cool material. But if you need to replace your underwear, or you're looking to get some fire retardant underlayers for DE, club racing, whatever types of motorsport activities you do, don't overlook Valero. There's a reason everybody's starting to use it. And there's a reason, like Joe said, that these really high level professional drivers are choosing to use Valero. And it's the only one out there that all they do, I think all you really need to know is Valero as a company, all they do is make underwear. All they do is make motorsport underwear. And to me, that was all I needed to know, because when you see a company that's small and niche and focused, and they're trying to be the best in that lane that they're in, that's really compelling. Every other company that makes Nomex and these other underlayers, they're also making helmets and race suits, custom race suits and shoes and gloves, and doing it all. So I thought that was probably one of the coolest aspects of that company. Good stuff. All right, we want to go ahead and wrap it up. We had a really good showing here on YouTube. I apologize for the technical issues, folks. I know you were expecting us on Facebook, but we tried our best to make it work, and the the Facebook live stream API did not want to have anything to do with us. Maybe it had already seen us enough today, Joe, and it just was tired of us.
It could be, yeah.
That's right. Excellent. Well, I'll go ahead and wrap it up. And I did record this, so we will be able to post this video again and share it after the fact. So thank you very much for joining me, Joe, and thank you very much for watching on YouTube, guys.
Thanks a lot.